Hello, this is Cotton Stoops, and welcome back to another Loomian Legacy HTUC video. And today's video is suggested by a lot of viewers, and that is, of course, on Tyrecks, the most suggested Loomian out of all my suggestions, and in my opinion, one of the better Loomians in the entire game. Thanks to what Tyrecks has, it either is the best at what it can do, or it is really good at what it can do, and Tyrecks, just like some of the other meta Loomians I'm talking about, is pretty versatile. So, with that out of the way, I'll be talking about how to use and counter Tyrecks. From sets, counters, and checks, to many roles it can play, and to resistances and weaknesses, as well as teammates, this video has everything you need to know on how to use and counter Tyrecks. So before we actually get into the video, we must ask the question, what role does Tyrecks play? Well, thankfully this is actually pretty easy to answer thanks to its base stats. Its base stats, basically the only thing you should be worried about is its range attack, and that's 62. Every stat you have is really good, or rather decently to pretty really good, and range attack is not really the best, so do not use range attack. However, its other stats like its HP, energy, and range defense are all decently high. HP and range defense is compared to the other bulky offensive Loomians to the entire game, stuff like Valkyries and other stuff, as well as this energy stat being really great because it does get you to 250 energy with very low investment, which is pretty good because it can save you some TPs for some other stats. And its range defense is decently high, and it's actually made even higher with its HP stat and its typing, which I'll be talking about later. But the main things you should be looking at Tyrecks is its melee attack and melee defense of 111 and 102. 102 melee defense is actually pretty good with its other HP stat, of course, as the other reason that Tyrecks has its ability Terrifying, lowering other stuff's melee attack by one stage, meaning that Tyreks's melee attack is seemingly higher than it actually is. And 110 melee attack is on the damaging levels of Boroks, Avitrosses, Volkloas, and some other stuff as well, so that is of course really great for Tyrecks. So what role does Tyrecks play? Well, this is a pretty easy question to answer now because it can be a semi-fast strong breaker, stuff like Borok it can compete with, and Tyrecks does have the melee attack and speed and bulk to do a lot of damage. It is a bulky and strong wall. You can particularly use Tyreks's typing to switch in on range attackers, use its terrifying ability to switch in on melee attackers, so that's pretty good, and it has the potential to set up. This is pretty good on top of the fact that it can be bulky and strong, so Tyrecks can be an incredible backbone for your team. So with that out of the way, I'll be talking about Tyreks's resistances and weaknesses, so let's get along with that. Tyreks's typing of Earth plus Steel, or rather Metal, I'm sorry for the Steel, but it is actually pretty great. Because while it does have 5 weaknesses to Plant, Fire, Brawler, Earth, and Water, some of these weaknesses aren't really as important, because water types, mainly Barblast, C.B.O, and Luminami, are some stuff you should be worried about, and other earth types like Borok and Sudamars, while they might be a small issue, you don't really have to worry about it because of your teammates, and fire types like Pyrelin and Chartiki are pretty much the only common fire types in the game, so that will alleviate your weakness, and brawler types, mainly C.B.O, is pretty much the only thing you should be worried about, and plant types, mainly Totab and Baumwerk, are some stuff you should be worried about, but other than that, Tyrecks doesn't really fear anything. And just like its weaknesses, it does have a lot of resistances, but this time they're actually pretty important. Bug, Metal, Typeless, Air, Toxic, Ancient, and Mind are really good resistances, and thanks to the Metal typing, it gets a lot of these resistances. Air types like Zeppelin, Wintrix, Nagoop, Stratosaur are some great stuff to switch in on, as well as some Metal types like Valkyrie, other Tyrekses, Xernites, and as well as Stratosaur, so that's pretty great. And bug types, mainly only Harvestect, is some stuff that you can try to switch in on, but I wouldn't recommend it. Toxic types like Snagoop, Barblast, and some other stuff are some good stuff to switch in on, especially stuff like Venilin and Swolder, or rather not Swolder, mainly only Venilin. So yeah, ancient types, mainly Obsidian, Joltooth, which is actually pretty good because you are immune or resisting all of its moves. And mine types, mainly Shachi, Metatoad, Ferroglyph, and some other stuff, you do really well against those stuff. And on top of that, you also have the ability to be immune to electric. Paired with this, you can wall a lot of stuff, especially stuff like Zulong and Joltooth, as well as Elephage 2. You can also threaten out other electric types like Metatoad, which is pretty important. And with Tyrex' typing being especially good with the abundance of air types, mine types, this is a really good typing for this metagame. So with that out of the way, I'll be talking about Tyrex' sets, so let's get along with that. Alright, Tyrex' first set is a balanced set. Now, balanced set is the mixture of having good range defense and good melee attack. The reason why we're maximizing our range defense is so we can, well, tank some range hits, and also we have terrifying for our melee attack side, so we don't really have to invest as much on robust. So running clever is pretty much essential, and brawny so we can do a lot of damage. Now, Steel Crusher and Earthquake are your best moves because Earthquake hits the hardest out of all your earth moves. Steel Crusher is mainly here for consistency, and it is a really high base power move. Sharpen, Complete Demolition, or Metal Streak are some options. Now I do realize that Power Focus is here instead of Sharpen, but whatever. Complete Demolition is kind of bad because it does let you be vulnerable for one turn, so obviously that's pretty bad. And Metal Streak does let its debuffs go away, so pick what you want. Dodge or Scapegoat is mainly the 4th move slot. I would pick Dodge so you can get a free turn of like nothing, get some free health amulet, and then get out of there. And Scapegoat is mainly here so we can try and set up on things that normally would try and 1v1 us, but with Scapegoat it's pretty much essential. And the personality of choice is Brawny, Clever, Very Clumsy. Like I said earlier, the balance set mainly focuses on maximizing your melee attack and range defense, so you can tank some range hits, have Terrifying to tank some melee hits, and of course having Brawny to tank and do some damage as well. And the item choice is going to be Health Amulet, Heavy Shield. Now you can you can run some other stuff, mainly pearls, like the Fire Pearl, Flame Pearl, whatever. You can run those, but I would personally pick Health Amulet because Tyrex can do a lot by switching in, dealing some damage, switching out. Plus Tyrex doesn't really have any dedicated recovery moves, so Health Amulet is pretty much essential. And the TPs of choice will be 12 energy to get up at 250. This lets you use 5 Earthquakes or 5 Steel Crushers, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that's basically it. 200 HP, 200 melee attack is maximizing our HP and melee attack stat. We want to do as much damage as possible and be able to, well, you know, take hits. And range defense is 88. It's mostly leftovers, but if you do want to experiment with putting some stuff into speed stat, melee attack stat, you can do that as well. Another good variant of this is by removing the melee attack and then putting it into the range defense, so I wouldn't blame you if you would try to run that. However, I would prefer you, if you are investing in range defense, that you would run the range defensive set with the Very Clever personality. This lets you tank a lot of range hits, especially from stuff like Zulong, Metatoad, Zeppelin, Wintrix, Valkyrie. So you have a pretty comfortable matchup against them, except a Wintrix or maybe a Zeppelin with mudslides, so yeah. But overall, I would mainly pick the range defensive set just for this if you want to be a range tank. So yeah, and the TPs of choice is going to be the same, however we invest 200 into range defense, and the last 88 leftover TPs can go into the melee attack or melee defense. And the last set I'll be talking about is the offensive set with the ability of Terrifying. So yeah, you already know what this offensive set is mainly here to do. It's to outspeed some stuff. So yeah, and the personality of choice, or rather the moves first, is going to be the same as last time. The personality is Brawny Nimble. Nimble is to outspeed some stuff that I'll be talking about shortly, and Brawny is to, well, do a lot of damage, and Very Clumsy is basically, well, you know, you want to decrease your range attack stat because we're not using that. And the item of choice is going to be Health Amulet or a choice of Essence / Shell. You can run Health Amulet with this set. I would personally prefer it still, because even the offensive set, Tyrecks has a bunch of defensive utility, especially with walling stuff like Zulong and Elephage and Metatoad. Well, not walling Metatoad, but being a really good hard counter. And you can also use this for stuff like Joltooth. And the choice of Essence is pretty self-explanatory because, well, we want to hit hard with one of our moves. And TPs is going to be 144 HP, that's pretty much leftovers, and 144 speed is basically so we can outspeed 200 nimble Pyrolins. Now obviously you can take out some from the HP and then put it into range or range defense or speed, so you can do a lot more outspeeding, but personally I think this speed stat is enough. And the 200 melee attack is to, of course, outspeed, well, not outspeed, but of course it's to deal as much damage as possible, and 12 energy is to get up at 250. So with that out of the way, I'll be talking about Tyrex' teammates, counters, and checks, so let's get along with that. The counters and checks of Tyrex is pretty much self-explanatory. You want melee balls like Tundulin or Obsidian, and if you do not want to run that, you can run stuff like Harvesect, Stratosaur, or Luminami. Stratosaur is bulky enough on the melee side to take hits from Tyrex. While not being the most perfect at it, it definitely can do a really good job against it because it can set up, it is immune to Earthquake, and it also does resist the metal, so yeah, just be careful that Tyrex can do a lot of damage to you, and you need to set up more. At the long term of the battle, you do win against it, so yeah. And Luminami is mainly here so we can resist or rather, we're not resisting anything. It's just that Luminami just has enough bulk to, you know, survive hits from Tyrex. It's a 4-hit KO, and then you can pivot out of it, do a Maroon or Tsunami, whatever, you can choose whatever. And Harvesect is mainly here because we resist Earthquake and we can Driving Force it out, which is super effective, and it also does let Tyrex, well, you know, get out of the battle. Tundulin or Obsidian are the last Loomians you can run. Mostly, while these guys do get hit super effectively, Resilience is already a good ability enough that it would let to survive the hit and then heal or deal damage back with Body Crash. And also already at its own, without Resilience, these guys do really well against Tyrex because they're mostly a 3-hit KO. And offensive checks are actually a bit more less than the defensive stuff. Of course, I'm missing some stuff here, but I just wouldn't want to put all of these guys in here. Stuff like C.B.O, Tatab, and Stratosaur are some perfect answers. C.B.O is to switch in on Steel Crusher, Tatab is to switch in on Earthquake, and Stratosaur is to switch in on all of the moves. You can run other stuff like potentially a robust Chartiki or a Pyrolin, stuff like that. I just wouldn't recommend it for offensively checking Tyrex. However, other than that, we could talk about its teammates, which are pretty decently overall. Offensive teammates like Metatoad, Zulong, Valkyrie, Tatab, and Mocho are all really good stuff. Now, you can see a lot of familiar faces from the Setamars video, and that's because these guys are pretty good teammates for Earth types overall. Metatoad does pretty well against Tundulin, Obsidian, and Stratosaur. You just need to watch out for Earthquake on the Obsidian. Don't let, well, you would rather not switch in on an Ice Hammer, and you pretty much wall Stratosaur offensively anyways. And Valkyrie and Mocho, they're a lot less, well, they are really good on their own. It's just that Metatoad kind of already fits the purpose already. But if you do not want to run Metatoad, Valkyrie is perfectly serviceable because it beats Stratosaur if Stratosaur gets on the switch and Valkyrie magnifies on that switch, and assuming you're running a shell anyways. And also, Valkyrie does have a pretty good matchup against a Tundulin or Obsidian. It resists Primal Slash and it resists Ice Hammer, so you can try switching in on those. Also, as well, it does pretty well against Harvesect too. You just have to watch out for the potential Driving Force. And Mocho is also a great Loomian here because it can switch in on Harvesect. It does pretty well against Tundulin. It just has to watch out for stuff like Stratosaur. And Zulong is always a good revenge killer or cleaner because it does destroy a bunch of the walls that Tyrex does not do well against. So yeah, And some defensive teammates, mainly Barblast, Obsidian, not Tyrecks, but Stratosaur and Harvestek are some good teammates for Tyrecks. Now, you can run a lot more stuff with Tyrecks, mainly stuff that doesn't want to get a ancient weakness, a mind weakness, a air weakness, stuff like that. It's just Tyrecks is overall pretty good in terms of the resistances department, so you don't really have to worry about much. But if I do want to pick a defensive core, I would pick Barblast, Stratosaur, and Tyrecks, which is overall pretty great. So with that out of the way, I'll be talking about my closing statements on Tyrecks and the conclusion of what I think about this thing. So yeah, let's get along with that. So yeah, overall I think Tyrecks is a pretty decent Loomian. I do not think it's the worst in the game. Actually, it's one of the best Loomians in the entire game, thanks to the resistances it has. For example, let's talk about the many resistances that the metal type brings, also with the very easily covered weaknesses that it has by other teammates. You can cover its weaknesses pretty well. Overall, this is a pretty good tank or melee attacker because it can lower the melee attack of the Loomian in front of it, switch in so it actually has a lot more longevity, use health amulet to get a lot more HP, and of course you can increase your range defense even more. So, well, you know, it's gonna be tanking a lot of melee hits, it's decently fast, it's very strong, and it tanks a lot of range hit as well as being a metal type that is immune to electric is admittedly a really good typing, because with this you wall almost all the electric types in the game, which of course is pretty good. So, like the video if you found this video informational, and subscribe if you're into these kind of videos. Videos like Tyrecks is a lot more common on my channel, mostly how to use and counter Pyrolin, the new Loomian, I think it's Fiskarna, Stratosaur, Eclipse, other stuff you can check out, so go do that. And with that out of the way, just remember that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.